We're gonna try and keep this back first. I'm gonna make a U-turn.
Giving a wide berth, just bring back around. Follow my voice here. And as we come up over this curve, make sure to stabilize on the sides. Come back this way a little bit. So we're going to go around. Watch the yellow.
Yeah, watch. You guys okay? All right. Yeah, we're pushing a little quick. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Slow down.
Good there.
Okay.
Perfect.
Let me put the brakes on.
And we're going to lift up on the sides just like we did before. You're going to be sidestepping around the sides of the lowering device. Can someone come up on this side as well, please, if there's anyone else? Shoot to the first bracket. All right, now we're just going to go straight. And perfect.
Thank you, ladies and
Yep.
gentlemen.
Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, the immediate family will be sitting in the front. If there are any extra seats for anyone who needs or would like to have a seat, please do so, and please do not leave any empty.
Adam lehevel dama, yamav kitzel ovid, baboker yatzitz v'chala, la'erev yimalev yovesh, tashev enosho daka, Vatomer shu b'nei Adam, Yuchochmu yaskilu zot, Yavinu le'acharitam, Ki lo v'moto yikach hakol, Lo yered acharav kivodo, Shmartam urei ashar, Ki acharit leishalom. Podeh Adonai nefesh avadav, Velo yeshmu kol hachosim bo.
Good afternoon. I want to begin our service with words that Irv wrote. We are blessed with consciousness There can be no satisfaction in the work we do, in the beauty that surrounds us, in the love we have of family and friends, and in the deep joy we feel in participating in a religious service made magical by the voices of the congregation in prayer and song. In each prayer, we, in effect, thank God for the gift of life. On this gray day, when we gather in sadness to say goodbye to Irv Kaminsky, these are beautiful words to open with, to remind us of the significance of gathering together surrounded by people who we love, and also the comfort, the meaning that comes in turning to our faith in a time of sorrow and loss. And so that's what we're going to do today. We'll join together in our liturgy as we turn to tradition to guide us in this time, during this uncertain time of grief. And first, on this Veterans Day, we acknowledge Irv's service to this country.
On behalf of a grateful nation, I'd like to present you this flag in honor of your father, Irving Kaminsky's faithful service to his country.
Adonai, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days are like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, "Return, O mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace." Death has taken our beloved Irv. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation, in their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Irv's love that united us in life, and which death cannot sever. For his companionship, which we shared along life's path, and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scripture that brings us the ever new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. We turn now to the text of Psalm 121.
Shir malot esainai el harim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai Ose shamayim va'aretz Yitin lamot raglecha Yanum shomrecha Hinei lo yanum velo yishon Shomer Yisrael Adonai shomerecha Adonai tzilecha Ayad yeminecha Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka V'yareach balayla Adonai yishmercha mikol ra Yishmor et nafshecha Adonai yishmor seitecha uvoecha Me'ata v'ad olam.
I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. Kohelet wrote, "The eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world, never complete their task, never cherish their loved ones enough before they are called home. How they yearn for yet another respite from the final summons, and how we yearn to have them close to us for yet another challenge in our lives, yet another joy, yet another precious moment together. God, be now with those whose hearts are broken, because whenever parting comes, it comes too soon. Console them at this hour. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, until the time of healing." We continue with Psalm 23.
Mizmor David, Adonai roi, lo exar, binodeshe abitzeni amei minuchot, Yanaleini, nafshi yishovev yancheni v'magle tzedek leman shemo, kam gelik begit amavit lo irara, ki ata imati shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shochan neged zorarai, tishan tav Hashem in roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov, v'chesed yudafuni kol yamei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai leorech yamim.
I saw a note from Naomi's funeral that was very clear about which translation of Psalm 23 to read. They wanted the King James version, the classic version, and it seemed a fitting tribute as we send Irv back to Naomi to read the same translation today. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And now these words from Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. We come together not just to turn to tradition, but also to begin to tell the many stories of Irv's life, and there are lots of stories. Today we'll hear a eulogy from Shoshana, who's speaking for the family, and there'll be Shiva tomorrow, and that's just the beginning. So those of you who are here in person and those of you who've joined us on the live stream, I hope that you will continue to share your Irv stories in the days and weeks and months to come. As you think of him, this is one of the ways that we will remember him. So with that, I'll turn it over to Shoshana.
I'm staying at 6903 Oak Ridge Avenue, Chevy Chase, where my parents brought me home when I was born in 1965. My father lived here for nearly 60 years, and the house is infused with him. I see him in the large backyard, which he doggedly mowed with a manual lawn mower, the only one I've ever seen. In the kitchen is the coffee grinder he ran at 7 each morning to grind enough coffee to wake the dead. There is the corner table displaying photos of his beloved English and Welsh Springer Spaniels across 5 decades. Upstairs is the bedroom he shared for more than 50 years with my mother. Rather than a single king-size bed, there are 2 individual beds pushed together so that my father could sleep under a light blanket and my mother could pile her bed high with comforters. Daddy told me once this arrangement saved their marriage. The living room is packed with hundreds of books, which I have no doubt he and my mother read and discussed. There are also hundreds of LPs, with a special stack of the records he especially loved. The living room is home to the enormous desk I remember seeing moved into the house when I was a girl. It was here that my father sat wrapped in his talit on Shabbat mornings in front of his iPad as he joined Torah study and Shabbat morning services during the long months of COVID lockdown. Every corner of the house testifies to a joyful life, well and fully lived. It is my privilege to celebrate his life with you today. I'd like to share with you a complete picture of my father's life, but I realize there are many holes. So many questions I never got around to asking. I'll share what I can, and perhaps someone out there can fill in the missing spaces for us. And I'm thinking especially of my cousins, my father's nieces and nephews, who I think are with us today. Irving Edward Kaminsky was born on May the 23rd, 1930 in Bangor, Maine. His parents, Sam and Anna, were no doubt very, very surprised to welcome him. He was born into a family of 3 siblings who were already teenagers. The timing of his arrival, just as the Depression was gaining strength, was just terrible. Daddy observed more than once that if his mother had discovered she was pregnant in a time when abortion was legal, he probably would not have been born. At the time of his birth, his parents were running a general store in the town of Brownville Junction, 40 miles from Bangor. Unfortunately, the business failed when he was 3, and the family resettled in New York City. Daddy mostly grew up in a crowded 3-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx, where family came and went and often came back. I can't tell you much about his early years except to say that life was difficult as his father eked out a miserable living in a garment factory. Summers appear to have been considerably brighter. He was sent off to upstate New York to Camp Kinderring, a Yiddish socialist summer camp poised opposite the communist Yiddish summer camp Kinderland. Of course, there was great rivalry between the 2 camps, which was no doubt part of the fun. My father embraced socialist ideology, and this no doubt played an important role in shaping his progressive and activist politics. Daddy was bright enough to win a coveted space at Bronx Science High School. He went on to study at City College of New York, but unfortunately I can't tell you what his major was. I do know that he studied French for his years there and became relatively fluent in the language. He was then drafted into the U.S. Army and began his 22 months of service in June of 1953. He was eventually based in Heidelberg, Germany, as part of the American effort to rebuild that country. Daddy described his short stint in the Army as some of the best times of his life. He felt the anxiety, but also the sense of liberation of leaving his sheltered Jewish life to experience the larger world. Early in his Army career, he and his buddies went to the fabled Heidelberg pub, the Red Ox, where he had his first drink other than Kiddush wine. After a few beers, he was overcome with a happy enthusiasm. He leapt onto the table and began belting out Yiddish songs to the German audience. He was summarily thrown out. The same thing happened on his subsequent visits until he was banned from the Red Ox. He described sitting just outside as his mates passed him tankards of beer through the window. Daddy took full advantage of his time in Europe to travel widely. His photo album includes pictures of London, Paris, and Rome, as well as places throughout Germany. His time in the Army was also when he forged some of his most significant friendships with Chris Servanos and John Kronig. The three men and their wives would gather at least once each year for decades afterwards. He also qualified for the GI Bill, and the generous funding enabled him to attend Harvard Law School after his discharge. Why law? Another question we don't have the answer to. Kate and I speculated that perhaps he preferred law to medicine, and as a first-generation American Jew, those were the only two paths he was permitted to consider. But now we'll never know for sure. Upon graduation, he made the decision to move to Washington, D.C. and look for a job there. It took quite a while for him to find employment, and that time of waiting was very challenging. One of the stories he loved to tell was of attending a family wedding and piling his plate high time and again at the buffet. One of his relatives remarked, "You look like you haven't eaten in a week." My father replied, "Try 2 weeks." And then at this point, he would laugh uproariously. Eventually, he did work at the National Labor Relations Board, where he spent much of the next 30 years. His colleague of many years, Leif Solomon, shared recollections of their time together and said, "Irv could always be counted on to give his all to support the rights of U.S. workers. But above all, he was one of the gentlest and most kind-hearted men that I've ever had the pleasure to work with." Daddy was dating a nice Jewish woman when he met her lovely roommate, Naomi. How their initial courtship deepened into a lifelong romance is another question I can't answer. The two of them came from completely different worlds. Daddy had grown up immersed in the wraparound Jewish cultural life of New York. He shared that at the time of his bar mitzvah, he hadn't yet figured out that there were Gentiles in the world. Mommy had lived in small Jewish communities across the central part of the U.S. Her father was a Reform rabbi, and that was pretty much all she'd ever known. Theirs was a mixed marriage, for sure. Grandfather married the two of them on September 15th, 1962, and they celebrated with a small dinner gathering at the Mayflower Hotel, and then a bucolic honeymoon in the Caribbean. They found an apartment in D.C., and then on their second wedding anniversary, purchased the home on Oak Ridge Avenue that came to mean the world to both of them. My parents didn't always see eye to eye. They could argue ferociously, but always came to a point of agreement. They were both brilliant and deep thinkers who connected around ideas as well as around their romantic attachment to each other. When I was born in 1965 and Kate 2.5 years later, they rebelled against the convention of putting children to bed at 6 p.m. each night. My father would come home from work and then embrace the several hours he had to play with us before he went to bed. My most special memories were of family vacations. We used to drive down to the Outer Banks of North Carolina for the October long weekend, long before that area was dotted with high-rise apartment buildings. We'd bring our dog Stuffy and rent a very basic cabin for 4 beautiful days near the beach. In the summer, we'd make our way up the East Coast to Bangor, where my father's mother had settled near her brother and daughter. Bangor was a deadly dull place, but we'd take day trips to the more scenic corners of Maine, like Bar Harbor. And then we'd drive west and rent a cabin at Lake Moosluk-Maguntic or somewhere nearby for a quiet and serene week. Politics were always an integral part of our lives. It never occurred to me that there were families where political discussions weren't normal at the dinner table. My father was a federal employee and so prohibited from involvement in elections, so my mother made sure to be twice as active for the both of them. Both were drawn into life at Temple Sinai. They were founding members of the Chevy Chase Kala, which meant monthly to discuss books and enjoy a meal together. Daddy joined the ritual committee and was active in other ways too. We attended synagogue fairly regularly. I remember Daddy bowing his head at Aleinu and also for the rabbi's closing prayer. Our bat mitzvah celebrations were big deals to him and Mommy, and they made sure the two of us continued our studies through confirmation. Many, many years later, Daddy was one of 4 bar mitzvah boys who participated in a special 70th anniversary close to their 83rd birthdays. They even had t-shirts made. Unusually, Daddy never brought work home. Both Kate and I remained hazy about what exactly he did. We visited his office every once in a while, where he worked away first on a manual typewriter and eventually on an IBM Selectric. I knew it had something to do with labor law, but I was pretty fuzzy about what that meant, and he almost never talked about work at home. In those days, it was possible to work a 40-hour week and then leave the office behind. He made sure to do exactly that. My parents shared housework more or less equally, which is unusual even in our era and was almost unheard of in theirs. Mommy did the cooking, so Daddy was always in charge of washing the dishes, especially after Kate and I left home and were no longer available as dishwashers. He began to cook several dinners each week so that Mommy would have to wash the dishes instead. He often cursed as he worked and muttered about how it was all going wrong. It almost never did. He became an excellent cook. His bluefish was especially delicious. He baked occasionally, especially chocolate almond torts when my mother's birthday fell during Pesach. At Thanksgiving, the two of them worked hand in glove to produce a magnificent feast of turkey, stuffing, brandied sweet potatoes, green beans with almonds, pumpkin and pecan pie, stuffed potatoes, and the beloved creamed pearl onions he remembered from his childhood. Kate and I grew up and made our own way in the world. Kate followed in Daddy's profession and became a lawyer, while I followed my mother's father and became a rabbi. My father took quiet but great pride in our accomplishments. We never doubted that he thought the world of us, even if he rarely expressed that directly. Daddy retired at 65 and began a new stage in life. He was one of those retirees who was just as busy as when he was working, but now he was doing only what he wanted to. He volunteered primarily with Food and Friends, preparing and delivering meals to AIDS patients, and Kate reminded me that he also tutored elementary school children. Eventually, he found his way to the Library of Congress, where he trained as a docent. I had the joy of going on one of his tours just a few years ago as he climbed dozens of stairs and took obvious delight in showing off this beautiful building and its treasures. And of course, he took advantage of his status as a retiree to throw himself into politics. One of the high points for him was on January 20th, 2009. He dressed himself in layer after layer on that frigid day, and despite my mother's worries, went to the Washington Mall for Barack Obama's inauguration as president. 46 years earlier, he'd attended the March on Washington and heard Martin Luther King's iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. Some things didn't change after he retired. One was jogging. He'd been swept up in Jim Fixx's revolution and had been running 2 miles nearly every day for years. In 1998, he decided to see if he could run a marathon. He trained for months, and on October 25th, he ran the Marine Corps Marathon at the age of 68. He only did it once, but for sure, that's one more time than most of us. He went back to running 2 miles and continued to do so for more than 10 years after that. He took enormous joy at the birth of each of his 4 grandchildren. He and Mommy came to stay when both of my sons were born and were absolutely invaluable as they cooked, washed dishes, and did endless loads of laundry. Kate's son Simon suffered terribly from colic, and Joe was out at sea with the Navy. Without hesitation, Daddy packed a bag and drove down to Florida to help her out for weeks. He and Mommy visited me in Australia 4 times, including for both of my sons' B'nai Mitzvah. He made frequent trips to Iowa to see Simon and Remily and presented both of them with a beautiful talit for their bar and bat mitzvah celebrations. He was an involved and doting grandfather who lovingly took on the identity of Zeta. In 2015, my mother, who had been extraordinarily healthy, suddenly became gravely and mysteriously ill. It was a heartbreaking time for her and my father as test after test failed to arrive at a diagnosis. She was eventually admitted directly into the intensive care unit where she was finally diagnosed with terminal cancer. My parents had written advance directives years ago, and my father knew my mother's wishes. When I arrived from Australia, he had the respirator turned off. She lived another 5 days, and we were able to bring her home to the bedroom the two of them had shared for nearly 53 years. Kate, Daddy, and I were all with her when she died. He grieved deeply for her, but he was able to work through his sorrow and find a new lease on life. He stayed in the house, surrounded by all of his shared memories of her. As Kate said, he found God after her death. He began to attend weekly Torah study at Temple Sinai, followed by their Hamish Kehillah service. He tracked the weekly Torah portion and occasionally offered his own commentary as part of the Kehillah service. One night, he bravely came to an evening for older singles at Temple Sinai. He reported that there was only one other man present who fled. My father had his pick of dozens of women, and he chose Ravel Brickman. They dated for several years and then fell into a comfortable friendship, attending the theater together and making sure to celebrate each other's birthdays. Ravel was just one of the people in his life who kept a close eye on him as he became more frail and his memory began to fail. Thank you to my sister Kate, to Fran and Jerry, to Georgia, to Donna and Jacob, Joe and Desiree, to Chevy Chase at home, and to the myriad others who looked after him in recent years. Your care means so much to us. Earlier this year, my brother-in-law Joe accepted a position at the Pentagon and moved in with Daddy. It was a lovely arrangement for both of them. Daddy cooked for the two of them, and Joe made sure he was eating. They went out often to eat and for the occasional beer. In May, I made it back to D.C. for the first time since 2019, and the three of us flew to Northern California to rendezvous with Kate for my cousin Frank's wedding. It was an absolutely glorious weekend, and my father enjoyed every minute of it. Frank's new bride, Patty, wrote to us to remind us how much her friends had loved burning up the dance floor with Daddy, who kept getting up for another dance and another. We landed very late in D.C., and when no staff was available to push my father's wheelchair back into the airport, the captain himself did so. This was just the icing on the cake. We're so touched to have Frank and our honorary cousin Jeneth here with us today. Frank's daughter Audrey, who attended college in nearby Eastern Maryland, and whom Daddy treated as his adopted daughter, has come as well. Nearly done. Thank you. In late July, Daddy moved to Sunrise Assisted Living in Silver Spring. We could not have hoped for a better place for him to spend his final months. Kate and I were overwhelmed by the affection the staff there expressed for him. They loved how gracious and respectful he was. They loved him. But despite their best efforts, he declined very quickly. Daddy's nephew Peter and his wife Kim traveled here from Connecticut last weekend for the opportunity to say goodbye, and his niece Diane spoke with him over FaceTime from Florida. It's hard to escape the conclusion that he waited for me and Kate to both be here before he suddenly took a turn for the worse on Monday and passed away less than 48 hours later. Jessa Hospice cared for him in his last days, helped to make sure that he was comfortable and pain-free. We were grateful that both his longtime Rabbi Hannah and Jessa's Rabbi David Rose came to visit on his last 2 days of life and offered prayers to ease his passing. I'm sad to have lost Daddy, but grateful for the wonderful life he lived and for his kind and generous spirit. Even with his aches and pains in these last years, he never complained, but looked for joy instead. So thankful to have had him as a presence in my life for 57 years. His memory is a blessing to all of us who knew him. Amen.
Thank you, Shoshana. Shoshana was the primary eulogizer, but as a member of the Irv Kaminsky fan club, I'm going to take rabbinic privilege and just add a couple of words. Irv and Naomi Kaminsky are the type of people that you want in your synagogue when you're a rabbi. Dedicated, loyal members for decades. They raised 2 daughters who are active members of our community. They were quick with a thank you note or just a note of gratitude for a particularly moving sermon. Irv welcomed me to Temple Sinai 10 years ago and was particularly present after Naomi died. He became a regular at Torah study. He was always a friendly face and a patient participant in a group that could get a little bit cantankerous at times. I arrived at Temple Sinai right in the era of the second bar mitzvah boys, or as they called themselves, the boys in the hood. And as Shoshana said, they even had matching t-shirts. Everyone was abuzz about this pretty incredible group of men who decided, based on the teaching in Pirkei Avot, that at 83 it was time to have a second bar mitzvah. Marvin Kranz, Ed Ehrenberg, Jean Bardak, and Irv studied and prepared together. They were all pillars of our community. They cheered each other on, and it's hard to believe that Irv was the last remaining member of that group. I went back and I read Irv's Devar Torah, which was on Parshat Korach. It was his Torah portion for his second bar mitzvah. And in it, he compares the God of Korach, arrogant, capricious, and demanding empty ritual, with the God of Isaiah 58, which he quoted. Is such the fast I desire, a day for men to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast, a day when the Lord is favorable? No, this is the fast I desire, to unlock fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe him and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst through like the dawn and your healing spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall march before you. The presence of the Lord shall be your rear guard. When I think about Irv, I first picture him where I saw him most, which was at Torah study. But as I read this Isaiah text in his Devar Torah, I was reminded of another image I have of Irv. It's a photograph I have of him with a group of Sinai members holding the Temple Sinai banner at the first Women's March in 2017. The photo, I will admit, makes me chuckle because behind his head there are all sorts of explicit signs about the newly inaugurated president and carefully drawn depictions of women's anatomy. But Irv was at home in that massive crowd. Irv had been marching on Washington since 1963. Irv lived the Torah that he studied in his professional life, in his relationships, and in his commitment to building a just world. It is hard to imagine Temple Sinai without Irv. We will miss him. May his memory and his inspiration always be a blessing. I invite you to take a moment to sit with your own memories silently. We turn now to the words of El Malei Rachamim. We pray for Irv's peaceful passage to life eternal. And I invite you to please rise if you're able.
El Malei Rachamim Shochen Bameromim גם אצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהרים כזוהר רקיע מזהירים את נשמת אבנר בן שמעון מחנה שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו אנא בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Irving Kaminsky, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us together say, Amen. Amen. We're going to turn to the ritual of Kavura, of putting earth on the casket. You can be seated for a moment. This is believed to be one of the highest mitzvot that we can perform in Judaism, because Irv can never thank us for doing this for him. It's like one final farewell, one final tuck-in. And it's a mitzvah that we participate in reluctantly. None of us are happy to be doing this. And so oftentimes we use the backside of the shovel for the first shovelful of earth, and then you can use the front side. So I'm going to invite Shoshana and Kate first to come participate in Kavura, and then if anyone else would like to do it, you can follow them. And you can go. Your roommate. The roommate. Do you want me to hold them? I think so, yes, I am. Others would like to choose where you can line up on the other side. We're going to gather once more. As we turn to Kadisha Tome, the Mourner's Kaddish. And before that, just a couple of notes. The family's going to gather at Clyde's of Bethesda after the service to share stories and to be together. And there's Shiva tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. The words of the Mourner's Kaddish don't actually talk about sadness or mourning. They are an affirmation of life, and it reminds me of those words that I shared at the very beginning of the service. Each prayer we, in effect, thank God for the gift of life. And that's what Kaddish is really meant to do. Even though we associate it with times of mourning and sadness, it's a reminder that we are still here and that we keep living even in the face of loss. And now it's our duty to take the lessons of Irv's life and to bring them out into the world, to live them out in our day-to-day actions. I invite you to say these words with me. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chay rechol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam omei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mrama, huya aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort all of the bereaved among us. And now it's hard to leave the cemetery. It's hard to walk away from this moment. So I'm gonna ask everyone who's not part of the immediate family to line up in two lines, sort of from the tent to the cars. Everything that we've done up until this moment has been focused on Irv, and now our focus shifts to the mourners, and we commit ourselves to being there for them. And that begins now as we accompany them out from this moment. So if you can line up.
What?
You good? You have what you need. And as Kate and Shoshana prepare to leave this moment, I invite you to repeat after me in this prayer. May God console you.
May God console you.
with all who mourn,
with all who mourn,
in Zion and Jerusalem.
in Zion and Jerusalem.
המקום ינחם אתכם בתוך שער אבלי ציון וירושלים. Now go forth in peace to life.
את נשמת אבנר בן שמעון מחנה שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום משכבו. ונאמר